Hi, my name is Chris Clark. I'm Artistic Director of Cinema St. Louis. Welcome to this special masterclass that we're sharing today. We have a couple of special guests today. Brian Holfeld, former board member, board chair, longtime Disney Pooh specialist, animator himself, will be conducting this moderated dialogue with our very special guest today, William Joyce, who is actually has a film in the festival this year among many special talents. So that film is called Mr. Spam Gets a New Hat, as part of our SLIFF Kids animated shorts program that is available for a modest price of $5 on our streaming platform. We're not allowing children under 12 to attend the festival this year for COVID and safety reasons. So we try to make it as accessible to as many people as possible. You can watch it at home, and there's lots of great fun shorts in the entire program. But we invited Mr. Joyce to talk to us about this genre because of his vast and wonderful career as an author, illustrator, and pioneer in digital and animated film. He has a whole couple of shelf, maybe not just one shelf, maybe a couple shelf full of awards, 6 Emmys, 3 Annies, an Academy Award, the Grand Poobah of film awards for a short film, Fantastic Flying Books of Mr. Morris Lessmore. So we're thrilled to have a little bit of your time this afternoon. Mr. Joyce, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to disappear into the background for a while and let your colleague and our good friend, good to see you again, Brian Holfeld, talk shop for a little while. And then I will be back later to help share questions and comments from our viewers. This masterclass and all the masterclasses, and actually one of the awards in the festival, is sponsored by the Shalapa Vedavali Foundation, and we're very grateful for the underwriting to make these educational opportunities possible. So once we return, I will be sharing questions and comments. We want our viewers to, all along the way, even during this conversation period now, start entering your questions and comments into the chat on Eventive, and we will relay those in about 45 minutes to an hour. So, okay, so thanks very much. And start.
Great, thanks, Chris. Thank you very much, Bill, for joining us. I know you're busy schedule, and thanks for taking time out to talk about Mr. Spam. So let's start there, since that's why we're here. What was the impetus for that project? It's not based, it's not a book. It wasn't a book, right?
It's not a book. I mean, you know, I've done, I don't know, I've published 50 children's books and novels since I got out of college. And that's kind of my entry point into storytelling and into the movies. But I had written this story, not even intended, well, you know, yeah, actually I did intend it to be a short film, probably about 15 years ago. And, you know, things happen, right? I mean, I've always got about 20 or 30 stories in the pipeline, and you know, you get excited about it for a few days or a week or two or a month, and then something else comes up. So anyway, it sat around, but it kept calling to me, right? And then David Prescott from DNEG Animation, he and I had worked together on Rise of the Guardians at DreamWorks when they adapted my books into that film. And for the first year, I was the director on it until my daughter got really ill, and also my wife. But David and I really connected, and he was effects animation coordinator. And we were talking about how cool it would be to start using game engines to do a lot of like pre-production or even production in animation, that we could bridge the gap a bit from storyboarding to layout, and maybe even like stage things, you know, like rudimentary staging with motion capture and stuff, just to get a sense of how to block our scenes quickly, because so much of that part of animation is at that time, and still it is to a degree, time consuming, and everything's, you know, gray and kind of hard to picture, and you're moving your characters around, and they're just these you know, factotums, these stiff little dudes that don't do anything, and you know, so it's like, gosh, I mean, what do we you know, use some motion capture to do rudimentary designs of characters, put some actors in the room, tape it off, figure out where the props are, design the props, figure out the dimensions of the thing, of the set that we need, and then see how far that gets us. And straight from storyboarding, or even before storyboarding, just to get a sense of how to make a scene work. You write these things and you don't really know. It's like in theater, you have the opportunity to workshop your play and go through a rehearsal process, and you get a sense of what's working, what's not, how to make it work better. And in animation, you're doing that pretty much in storyboarding, and in storyboarding, it takes a lot of time and a lot of elbow grease, and it is so particular. And there's different storyboard artists working on a sequence sometimes, or sometimes you have the luxury of having one storyboard artist working on a sequence, so you get a continuity that's hard to get otherwise. But still, it takes so much time to draw all that stuff and to work it through. And so we set this thing up with an early game engine sort of technology that David had come up with to feed into what we were trying to do. And it was remarkable and so exciting and invigorating and immediate. All the things that animation generally isn't. And as much as I love it, it is so much of a hurry up and wait. And it's a good thing you have so many things to figure out since you start with nothing in animation except a blank screen. And you have to fill it up. Every doorknob, every nail, every blade of grass, every person, every leaf. And so you're always busy when you're doing these things, but to really know what your movie is going to look like is something you don't know until much later in the process. You're just feeling your way along and keeping your fingers crossed and hoping that things will look cool once they start to move. And seeing that quickly and early was exciting for us. And it's so revolutionary at the time that Jeffrey Katzenberg said, guys, this is fantastic. Bravo. Don't do this anymore. You're freaking everybody out.
It's not how we do things.
It's like, we got 500 movies in the pipeline, and there's a lot of people that are worried for their jobs because of what you're working on right here. They think they're going to lose their jobs. I cannot have that unrest. So stop, please. And eventually, technology will catch up to what you guys have been talking about. And it has caught up to a degree. Mm-hmm. But it was a weird and frustrating moment. It's like, man, we're changing the world, and he won't let us. We have to put it back in the box. But David called me and he said, okay, I'm at DNEG now, and I have they've given me the power, the mandate to explore game engines really thoroughly. And so the way I would like to do that is to do something with you. And I'm like, thank you, David. And so we talked about doing a feature. And I said, but features are so hard to get. If we're going to do this, we're going to try using specifically the Epic game engine. I don't want to get deep into production on something and then start figuring out it's not working, or having to deal with the technical problems that we're going to face. And because it'll end up costing so much, and there'll be something that delays, and it'll freak everybody out. And it just seems like a recipe for a possible disaster. So let's do a short film first. And he's like, great, you got one. So I sat out and I had several stories that I've been thinking about, but only as books and not as short films. I hadn't thought about short films for a while. And so I ran a few of them past him. There were two that he really liked and that I was really excited about doing. And one was small and intimate, and the other one was Mr. Spam, which is much more ambitious. And I'm like, look, let's swing for the fences on this. Let's push the medium as much as we can so we can see what breaks. And if this is about figuring out this technology and how we can integrate it into what we do and make what we do faster and more intuitive, I think we should really go for something that has a little more scope. And Mr. Spam had that. But then I found, to my complete surprise, that the story that I'd written 15 years earlier and written specifically to be a short film, had much more emotional appeal to me now than it did when I wrote it 15 years earlier. And in that period of time, I had lost my wife and my daughter to brutal, horrible diseases. And I felt very, I don't know, I was damaged, right? And Mr. Spam is about someone who is damaged every day, and by what he does, by his job, but he meets someone, and that someone opens up the world to him again, and he's able to unleash all the dreams that he has inside of him. And that happened to me. I mean, I did not ever expect to fall in love again after my wife died, but I did. I met this wonderful woman. And so all of a sudden, Mr. Spam tied into what was happening to me in my real life, and in a way that I had never anticipated. So it changed the tenor of it somewhat. And I'd never done anything that was that romantic before. And so as we sat there, I was like, David, look, let's see how subtle we can get with animation and performance and even design. I mean, I wanted the designs to be a little less cartoony. And I've been pushing towards that almost from the beginning of my animation career, and especially on the film I did with Blue Sky called Epic, which was supposed to be called Leaf Men, and the head of the studio, after 10 years of development and production, decided to change the name from Leaf Men, which was a book I'd done, a picture book I'd done, change it for reasons that are still incomprehensible to me or any of us, to the single word epic with a lowercase e, since everything in it was small. And it's about fairies and wars within fairyland. And so in that film, we really started pushing pushing the character designs of the people a little more towards reality and a little less into what we think of as broad cartoon design. But I wanted to push that further, and because we knew we wanted to do an animated version of The Great Gatsby as our first feature, and that would require something much more sophisticated. And I don't even like the word sophisticated, just something closer to reality. And we knew all the pitfalls and the uncanny valley, but we've been doing this long enough. We had a sense of how to learn from those mistakes that can happen when you try to get too real. So Mr. Spam was, began as an exercise in technology and using new technology and pushing design into, a more realistic place. I also wanted to recreate the look of old Technicolor, which is something I always thought had a power and an allure like nothing else in cinema. And it's, it's vanished basically. I mean, the old Technicolor process, it's been long gone. And so the way that they achieve those crazy colors of from the Wizard of Oz, like the yellow of the Yellow Brick Road and the incredible red of the Ruby Red Slippers and that green of the Wicked Witch of the West and all those other early Technicolor movies, they just seared your retina with their vividness. And I was like, I want to recreate that, David. I want to use all this new technology to try to recreate old stuff that I think is worth, revisiting. And because one of the things in animation we get caught up in, especially when we're trying to get more realistic, is to put every little detail in. And I think it's distracting. I think that, and I was like, old Technicolor was reality, right? They were filming people, they were filming actors and real sets in live action. But the way Technicolor works takes away detail and takes away information and gives us a simplified, stylized reality. And I was like, so if we're trying to mess around with reality and stylize it, I think Technicolor is like a thing we should emulate. And so that became a major focus of a lot of our efforts. in doing this film. So in that keeping with, let's use new technology to celebrate old techniques. I said, also, I think it should be silent. And, in fact, I want the camera moves to not be perfect, and I had the layout guys like study films like Sunrise by Maria Marnell and Metropolis and Wings by William Wellman. And I'm like, look, I mean, the film, the way the camera moves in these movies, they're really getting the language of film down pat towards the end of silent films, and with a power that's unmistakable. I mean, you're starting to see the first tracking shots and things like that. And there's a reason they became part of the language of film, is because they did them so beautifully in those old films. And you can feel the excitement that must have been on set for the filmmakers and the cameramen and everybody when they started to see how cool that looked. But they're not perfect by any stretch. You feel the filmmakers, you feel the technicians, you feel the weight of the camera. And there's something about that really appeals to me, and I think can sometimes enliven a film experience. Like when you feel the hand of the filmmaker, literally, So I'm like, guys, look how bumpy these tracking shots are. I mean, sometimes it's like, boom, boom. I mean, it's just so. Let's use all our brilliant technology to make it look a little crummy.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because you can tell. Now that you say it, it's not something you notice when you're watching it, but I remember when the dress just pops, and it's just like, that's the old Technicolor thing. It's like it was like I was thinking of Robin Hood when you were talking about.
Yes.
That's the one. I remember seeing that on the big screen for the first time, and just like was like, why haven't I ever seen this before? Why don't they keep doing it?
I know that movie is a pivotal movie, Robin Hood, Errol Flynn's Adventures of Robin Hood.
Yeah.
And, I mean, there's a handful of films that absolutely changed my DNA and made me a storyteller and a filmmaker. The Wizard of Oz and Robin Hood are definitely two of them, and some of that is not just the power of the filmmaking, but the incredible power of the color. I mean, the greens in Robin Hood,
they don't exist in nature. It's great.
so much better than real.
It is. It's much better than real.
Yeah.
What was the first? Do you remember what the first silent movie you ever saw was?
I think it must have been Birth of a Nation.
Oh, that's interesting.
And because they re-released it in the early 70s or the late 60s. And I remember being in a theater in downtown in my hometown of Shreveport. And my dad was he was like, well, you need to see this. And I'm like, okay, what? I think I was 10 or 11. And I'd seen a few shorts, silent film shorts, that they would show up on stuff on Saturday mornings or after school. And so I'd seen some Keaton, and I'd seen some Fatty Arbuckle and some Chaplin and some early R Gang, Sennett stuff, Max Sennett stuff. And so I always thought that those were spectacular and hilarious. And so I was like, okay, so it's a silent film, so it's gonna be like that, right? And he's like, not really, no, it's really funny. I mean, it may be funny sometimes inadvertently, but the things, I forget, I think it's 4 hours long, I can't remember. But I sat down in this theater, and an old movie palace, much like I think where you're having your festival. And the film began, and it was off-putting at first, but then its power began to wash over me, and they had an organ, they had one of those big organ things, and playing the whole time, and playing a version of the score that they had made for the film when it was originally released. So it was a transformative experience. And I mean, though it's politically horribly incorrect film, you cannot argue with the power of the filmmaking, especially towards the climax, as one of the most exciting sequences, as crude as their technology was, and as misguided as the story was. It's powerful filmmaking, there's no doubt about it. And but it isn't like I went from that point on, my God, I will study silent films. Like, no, it's a cool experiment, Dad. Let's not do it again. And but when I went to film school and I began to see more, right? And you know, so and when I was in film school in the late 70s and early 80s, it was hard to find these films. It was hard. It was, you know, there wasn't home video. Yeah, there wasn't anything. I mean, you know, there were 3 channels, all right? When you turned on television, they went off at midnight, for crying out loud. I mean, I remember it telling, I mean, one of my favorite things when I had kids was like, once upon a time when TV was in black and white, there were only 3 channels. And so my kids were like, why was it in black and white? And it just, on a lark, I said, because color hadn't been invented yet. And so they thought that meant like, there was no color.
My kids did the same thing. They thought the world was black and white.
The world was in black and white. Even though, you know, you look at a painting like the Sistine Chapel, it's in color. But and then they go, but why? So it was only in black and white. There are only 3. And I go, yes, and it went off at midnight. Why? Was the TV tired? I mean, it's just like the idea of there being an end of television when people went to sleep was just, they could not fathom that. So trying to see a silent film in those days, I mean, thank God that there were places, you know, especially in a film school, and they could get prints of these things, but oftentimes they're in terrible shape. And when I saw Metropolis for the first time in film school, it was such a butchered version of it.
Yeah.
And they played, instead of trying to play anything like silent film appropriate, they played Pink Floyd to
Of course.
sort of worked better than you think. And that was before Pink Floyd became the Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz, yeah, I was thinking of that.
But I began to feel like, I began to get that sense of like, this is when the language of film was invented. These guys are making up the language of film. And you can see when they haven't got it figured out, but you can see when they get it figured out. And it's astonishing how powerful it is at its origins. It's like, you know, when you start to see the first tracking shots, like I said, it's like they were so judicious in their choices because they had to be. It was hard to do that. And they're like, so like, if we want to move this giant heavy camera from here to there, it's going to cost a lot of money and take a lot of time. And so they chose that with care. And then they executed as best they could, sometimes with amazing brilliance under the conditions that they were trying to make films under them. And so you feel it. And that's a thing that stuck with me and has stuck with me, that sometimes I like looking at these. It's like the lessons are there and you're seeing them getting chiseled in bedrock, you know? Like there's a reason those shots ring true, is because when they did them the first time, they did them so beautifully and so like emotionally satisfying, intellectual way.
You know what, I for years I've been kind of obsessed by this, that the camera move, like I think the most famous one is the push in on John Wayne in Stagecoach. And that's a pretty common thing, just pushing in on the character's face. And I guess because of the lenses of the day and it's never perfect. Like you say, there's always a part in the middle where there's a little bit of, it's out of focus for a second or two, and then it comes back in. And to me, that's one of those things. It's like, oh, I'm there, you know, it's just, and I always wondered whether it must have been a technical thing, but as a choice, it works really well. So was it a choice? I don't know. Did somebody say, oh, we could fix that? And somebody else said, no, I like it.
I have a feeling that was the best they could do. And they had, you know, a schedule, right? We got to move on. I mean, it's not perfect. People will get it, but it gives me chill bumps. You know, that shot's so awesome. And I think a lot of it's because he goes literally out of focus halfway through. for maybe a second or two.
Mhm.
And it jiggles and touches but there's two things. It was a perfect choice to introduce his character, and John Wayne was the perfect performer of which to do that. And it was just in the rhythms that cinema are, right?
Mhm.
And that's
Yeah, I mean, it made that shot made him a star. It was like
it did. And there's it's not the only time that happened, and Ford used that shot, and The Searchers is a very similar shot. One of the most riveting shots in cinema is when John Wayne, again, this time 25 years later, they're looking for Natalie Wood, who was kidnapped by Indians when she was a child, and they have been for years trying to find her. And they come across a child, a young adult now, that may be the girl they're looking for, the niece that John Wayne's character is searching for. And that character, the girl they find, is just nearly insane. And they push in on John Wayne looking at her, and it's almost the same shot, but instead of being this buoyant, heroic, effect, they have his eyes shrouded with the shadow from his cowboy hat. You just barely see the bottoms of his look is so stern and full of misery and hate, and yet it is the same shot. It's focused a little better, but it's still, you feel it. And so that's what I mean. It's like sometimes they invented these shots and they stuck around for a reason. I like digging through and finding those.
Oh, totally. My introduction to silent film, I think we were about the same age. There used to be I think it was PBS, The Magic Lantern, it was called. And every Sunday night they would show a different silent movie, and my dad kind of watched them with me. But they were always like, Lady Windermere's Fan, just like these stagey, not moving things, So my first encounter was like, well, it's interesting. But then I remember the first time I saw The General, like you were saying, these things weren't around. And it was a local library in St. Louis. And I think I was in high school. My friend Ken Quapis, who is now a director, we sat there, and it was on the Black Hawk print, 16 millimeter Black Hawk print, no sound. And I'm sitting next to the projector, which is just making the loud noise. But there it was. It was like, wow, it was amazing, even so. But it was so hard to, you had to work.
And even like the first time I saw The General was in film school, and they projected it on a sheet on a wall. All right, and there was no music at all, and yet we laughed until we couldn't breathe.
Mm-hmm.
We were tense and with the same response, so tense we couldn't breathe. And then like it's one of those movies. When it's over, you've got that movie buzz,
Yeah.
Movies are awesome, and it takes a while to come down from it. But there's Buster Keaton out there inventing this stuff as he went along. He had such amazing intuition about movement and frame and how to give a sense of urgency and how to stage big action things. He's a comedy man. He's a gag man, right?
Yep.
And he's making this thing on the fly. They only have one shot they can do of the train exploding in the bridge, because they only have one bridge and one entirely closed, and they can't mess that up. But there they are on the seat of their pants.
Yeah.
Making cinema, making the language of cinema, and with such. You look at some of those, especially Keaton. It's like they're just flawless. Like I can't think of anything else. They're perfect. They're perfect.
Yeah. The General is perfect. Yep.
They didn't have dailies. They couldn't look at their stuff. I mean, he was in there performing and basically directing these things, and then it took a few days before he even knew if they got what they needed. I mean,
Yeah.
crazy. But
Yeah.
and they didn't know, they had only I love reading about Keaton. I love reading about how he made films. And so many of those silent film guys, they had a general idea of the film they were going to make. They had a sort of outline and the situation they wanted to explore, but they made the movie up as they went along and worked out gags. It's so much like animation. I mean, I've always felt like scripts are just the beginning in animation. It's all this magic. A lot of the magic happens just as we're moving along. And there they were on A Wing and a Prayer in live action. He is an animated character. I can't even like, how did he know that his poses were reading and lining up so perfectly with the camera? Was it because he'd been in vaudeville for so long that he knew instinctually how something was going to play and look? But I mean, think it just kills me how amazing those guys are.
Fantastic Flying Books opens with a wonderful homage to Steamboat Bill Jr. Where do you stand in the Keaton Chaplin dichotomy? Like, do you have a favorite, or do you prefer?
You know, favorites are for suckers, right? Like, you know, just enjoy the movie. Okay,
that's a wonderful way to put it.
Enjoy the filmmaker, right?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes there were rotten filmmakers that every now and then made a really good film.
You know, I have this. I don't know if somebody told me this or what, but every movie, and I guess you could say book too. Every movie, no matter how bad it is somebody's favorite movie. So
wow. People out there I don't want to meet then.
that keeps me going.
Oh my God. I mean, I'll tell you this, if you want me to get into like the Keaton Chaplin thing, I think that because I love them both, I find myself influenced by both. And there's probably more of a Chaplin influence in Mr. Spam Gets a New Hat than Keaton. Keaton was very influential in the Fantastic Flying Books of Morris Lessmore, and to the point that, you know, we basically designed Morris as a simulacrum of Keaton. But I think that Keaton is the more modern filmmaker, that his stuff does not ever seem to age at all. And it had an intuitive sort of beauty and poetry that's so unforced. And sometimes Chaplin pushed it into sort of Victorian melodrama.
Yeah. And
that's fine too. But Keaton seems like he could be making films now in a way.
Totally. Yeah. The camera had to keep up with him. And I think that's why his movies they are so modern. He was using the camera. I always feel like Chaplin is capturing his performance. It's very, there's very little actual film technique in it. It's all about, and it's interesting too. I was thinking about this as I was looking at your films and thinking about how Chaplin, I think that Walter Kerr book, The Silent Clowns. I think he points out how Keaton plays this everyman who is kind of up against his environment. It's always kind of a man in his environment, whereas Chaplin is kind of like man in society. And I think because of that, his films are less emotional, and also because it's all about Chaplin. So even when there's a love story, it's kind of like, it's Chaplin and some girl. But with Keaton, for some reason, the emotional content of Keaton just comes across so much more for me. And I don't know whether it's the storytelling or just because his character is so likable and so relatable.
Well, it's an interesting thing. Keaton was always the calm in the middle of the storm of the movie, right? And Chaplin was usually fighting against the forces that were more powerful than he, and just trying to keep his dignity and hopefully find love. insecurity. And man, he mined that beautifully. And so I can't say that I think one
Is better.
is better. It's just
Yeah.
they're different. And for Mr. Spam, I mean, I watched City Lights over and over and over.
Mhm.
And because it's so beautifully poignant, you know, especially when he finally finds the girl at the end.
Mhm.
And that's the sort of quiet emotional intensity I wanted to find for Mr. Spam. And so, you know, where in Morris Lessmore it was Keaton all the way, and even down to the hat. And for Mr. Spam, he has a derby, a bowler, you know, more like Chaplin. So those guys, and you know, and there are other, like Harold Lloyd, you know, I think is underappreciated as a comedian and a filmmaker, and
I also have my Harold Lloyd mug too. So
I mean, come on.
but that's funny. My wife really, she likes Harold Lloyd out of the three the most too.
Really?
Yeah, I don't, and again, I think it's that she just responds to that character because he is. Keaton and Chaplin were both kind of outside the realm of society, but Lloyd is like, you know,
Yeah, man.
speedy. He's speedy.
He's
He's always,
you know, he's
Yeah.
functioning.
yeah, he is. He's like the most functional of the three as a personality. Yeah, that's
So,
true.
and then, you know, they're all like, there's so many lessons for anybody interested in animation. There's so many lessons from those filmmakers. You know, it's on how to time things, on how to.
Mhm.
I mean, I haven't been able to even come close to capturing the timing that those guys had in camera, you know, and that they would just do. And when to cut, when to edit, how to strike a pose, you know, and the way they move is so beyond real. I mean, it's such, it's like bedrock techniques in performance that if you study them, especially if you're an animator, you know, you will learn how to put across a gag or to put across an emotion. And so that's one of the things I find very powerful about those films is, and yet they still seem very sophisticated and subtle and timeless.
Totally. Yeah, it is. And yeah, it is amazing to me how many people in animation don't have that background that you know, we sometimes have to tell them to watch something so that they can get.
That's one of my favorite things about my life in the last 15 years is working with younger people in film and going, watch this movie, watch this performance. Here's a shot. Here's Cary Grant in Bringing Up Baby. This is, and you can watch it with the sound off, right? I do that a lot, actually, to really understand how well a scene works and how they're making it work and how performance works. Watching it with silently, because you can pay attention to how they're moving and what they're doing a little bit more. And Cary Grant's movements, his performance is so complete and comic and spectacular in Bringing Up Baby. And so, you know, a lot of times I'm talking to young people that don't even know who Cary Grant is. You know, they've never seen a Cary Grant film. And it's not like they fight it and they go, oh, that's just that old stuff. I've never had an experience yet where it's like, I've shown at Moonbot, my old company, showing everybody Singing in the Rain. Most of them have never seen a musical, much less, you know, a golden age musical. And I was a little nervous. I was like, I don't know if they're going to respond to this. And it blew them away. They were like, this is so good. Oh my, you know, they just couldn't believe what they were seeing. And again, there's something there those lessons are there. They haven't gone away.
Yeah.
And I also like juxtaposing, like going, you guys like, the Coen brothers? Yes. Oh my God, yes. All right, we're going to watch Mr. Deeds Goes to Town by Frank Capra, starring Gary Cooper. Who are these people? Well, you need to know who they are because so much of what the Coen brothers do comes from specifically this movie and Frank Capra as a director. They learned many lessons, and there's a stylized humor and humanity to Mr. Deeds and to Capra's work that's echoed, and you can see the influence in a heartbeat. And so we watched Mr. Deeds, and again, I was a little nervous. I'm like, I don't know if they're going to dig this or not. And you could hear, during the emotional parts of the film, you could hear a pin drop. I mean, they were so into it, and they knew exactly what I was talking about. They were, oh my God, the Coen brothers stole everything from this. Now they just stole everything. They stole a bunch. So.
Yeah. Boy, I just lost my train of thought because the message. I'm at that age where anything throws me off. I taught a film appreciation class at Webster University in St. Louis for a while, and it was the same thing. And it was interesting because some films were like that; they would have that reaction, and other films it was just like, why is this considered? But I think they were. I don't know. To change subject a little bit to get. Your first TV show was Rolie Polie Olie?
Yes.
And you were you were the EP on that too, right? So you dove in and did everything.
Yeah. And
you sound tired just thinking about it.
It was one of the funnest things of my career. And the thing is, this is something that I get asked a lot by young filmmakers is like, how did you get to do this? How did you get, and like all of this is accidental. I mean, almost everything in my career has been some ridiculous accident. And Rolie Polie Olie was one of those. It was like, I got a call from my agent who said, there are these guys and there's an animation house in Canada called Nelvana, and they want to do a show with you. And I go, I don't really want to do a TV show. And I specifically don't want to do one with Nelvana. I hate their animation. Babar was on, they did Babar, and I was like, I think they just decimated that. I just can't stand it. And my agent said, well, look, the main guy who runs Nelvana is determined to get you to do a show, and he is coming to Shreveport, to your hometown, on Wednesday of next week. And so will you please at least like get him, talk to him? Okay, he's going to take all the trouble to go. And I was like, all right, but I don't want to do this. And so his name is Topher Taylor, and he showed up, and we just started talking. And I had on my easel, I had this one painting I'd done for the story of Rolie Polie Olie, which I'd written the story, and it was a rhyme that just popped into my head. Rolie Polie Olie rolled out of bed, brushed his teeth, recharged his head. And I was like, I don't know what the hell any of this means. I suppose that Rolie Polie Olie is a robot. I don't know. But who else would recharge their head? So I started working on it, and I was like, well, I'd worked on Toy Story. That was my first animation gig was, I mean, of all things, was doing concept art and gags and character design and stuff on Toy Story. And so I knew what computers were good at, round things, square things, solid shapes. And as Topher Taylor was sitting there, and I had this one painting from Rolie Polie Olie where everybody was round. There's just something so pleasing about round, especially for children. And I thought about Mickey Mouse with all his circles. And I'm like, so it's not a mouse, he's a robot, and everything's round. Everything is round. So I'd done this one painting of Rolie Polie Olie with his family in their round car. And it took me forever because circles are incredibly hard to paint perfectly. And this is before you could paint on your computer. And you had to really sit there and like, and you got off just a teeny bit. It looked terrible. So after one painting, I'm like, I'm not going to do this. It will take me the rest of my life and I will go insane. And so I said, wait a minute, Topher, because he told me they're starting to, he said, I heard you're working on this. Toy Story hadn't even come out yet. All right. He's like, I heard you working on that new thing that's coming out, Toy Story. What was that like? And I go, God, it's so awesome. It's the future. And he goes, well, we could try that. I'm like, really? He goes, look, Bill, I want you to do something so bad. I'm going to like guarantee you total artistic freedom and we will do whatever you want. And I'm like, get out, man. I mean, really? I give you my word. And so I looked over at the easel and I said, we should do this because it's all circles and it's a family of robots. It's like Leave It to Beaver, but with robots. And he goes, perfect. Let's start working on it. And I had not wanted to see him. And I'm like, I didn't ever believe it would happen. But he introduced me to this fellow named Scott Dyer, had a small animation company in Minneapolis called Windlight, and what they were doing. And I'm like, okay, they can do this. And we began working on test animation and began to write the Bible for it. And I've never written a Bible for a television show. And that's what kept happening to me. It was like I kept getting to do things that I had no experience with and no preparation for. And I don't know why people kept giving me that rope, but there we were. And so I look at the test animation that we did for Olie now, and it makes me to me, it's terrifying. It's so crude, but I said, we're going to use, we should use Little Rascals music. We should use Leroy Shields background music from either Little Rascals or from the Laurel and Hardy shorts. And at that point, they were starting to release those recordings with a group called, the Bo Hunks are their name. A bunch of musicians who recreated all those extraordinary jazz influenced background music. And so I said, we just put that behind this, and I think it's going to sell it because there's something so buoyant and joyful and old school cartoony about this sound. And so Nickelodeon looked at it and it just freaked them out. Like, they're like, this is too, we don't even like, this is alchemy. You guys are like, using black magic. This freaks us out. And we're like, well, dang, was not the response we hoped for. And then we took it to Disney. They had kind of the same response, but they tested it and they went, man, it tested so strong. Like, and so whatever you're doing works. So just keep doing it. And so for 5 years,
Wow.
And so I designed everybody. I helped write the theme song. I'm the lyricist of the theme song.
Holy cow.
And that we recreated a band to sound exactly like, the old Leroy Shields arrangements for those short films from so long ago. And I'm like, it's blue skies and picket fences and robots, guys. And it's simplicity. It's simplicity and kindness and every goofy daydream that you had as a kid, but it can come true in this little neighborhood of robots. And that's what we went with.
That's so great. Wow, 5 years, that's a commitment. I mean, getting on a show is a commitment. It has to be something, well, it's yours. So, but yeah, I mean, it's
well, after a while, the team bought the universe, right? I mean, that's what happens is you find a team, you build a team that eventually not only embraces the language or the language that you've made and the world that you've made, but then they embrace it so much that then they start to be a part of it and start contributing to it and start changing it in ways you didn't expect that you love. And that's what happened on that. And these guys went from doing Babar to getting to like flex every creative muscle they'd ever wanted to flex. And it it just was, and so we're working on doing a new version of it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, not exactly a reboot, just an extension of it. It principally because everyone who worked on it at Nelvana said this is the most fun we ever had, and we'd like to do it again. And I'm
That's
like,
wonderful.
me too, dude.
It makes so much difference when everybody is on the same page, when everybody wants to make the same show. And when that happens, oh, it's great. It just, it makes the show better. It makes the experience better.
It's the most freedom other than doing short films that I've had in film.
Oh, that's interesting.
Disney just said, I'm literally, we got notes from them so seldom. And I mean, sometimes we go a whole season without really hearing anything from them. They just were like, this great, just keep doing it. And so, I could experiment with things like, I want to do an episode that's all one shot. And this is right around when Goodfellas had come out, and they had that incredible shot of them going into the Coca Cabana, and which is, I don't know, I think it's 7 minutes. And that's exactly how long our episodes were. I'm like, I want to do it. It's just everybody trying to get out the door to go to school in the morning. In the 7 minutes that it begins with, we have 7 minutes to get in the car.
Wow. In real time.
In real time. The computers couldn't handle it.
I was just going to say, did you have to invent a new computer to do that?
So what do we do? It was so cool. We used the same trick that Hitchcock used in Rope, because he would only do like 7 minutes per shot. He wanted to do an entire film in one shot. The first time somebody tried that. But their film canisters wouldn't hold that much film. They'd only hold 7 minutes worth of film. Yeah. And so they would have somebody walk in front of the screen, or a chair get in the way so they could wipe across black for just a second and change the reel. And we literally did the same exact thing that Hitchcock did in Rope in 1950, whatever. We had to use the same trick, 1990, whatever. And
wow, so you had to design each shot of a certain length, and then figure out how you're going to get in and out of it, the ins and outs. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That is very ambitious.
I mean, that's the kind of thing they let us do. It was just like, I said, let's just do a show about an entire episode about Zoe, the younger sister, trying to catch a leaf that's blowing in the breeze, right? And sometimes just going, doing this one silly, simple, magical thing. And then we did. And it's I think one of our best episodes, because it's just so sweet and gentle and kind, and makes you feel like a little kid again. And how important it was for her to catch that leaf, and the things she went through, and the things that no one else understood as she's running through a scene, because she wants to catch that leaf. And then she befriends the leaf, of course. But yeah, they left us alone.
That's wonderful. I had that experience on Rescue Bots, which was a younger version of the Transformers for kids who they actually made a whole new line of toys so that kids under 5 could manipulate them. So they're very easy, and it was all bright colors. And if I do say so myself, I mean, you'd never know it was a Transformer show. It was almost basically about two families, the robots and the humans with them, and they had started, I don't even remember, there was a network called The Hub that was on for about 5 minutes. There was a co-owned by Hasbro and Discovery Family. And they shut down. Hasbro shut down The Hub, sold it back to Discovery after like 2 or 3 seasons. So we didn't have we had like no network executives. Our Hasbro executive had been with us since the beginning. So she was like, do anything you want. So we were just like telling the same kind of stories, very simple family stories. You'd have to have a rescue in, 2 rescues an episode, but they were all about, emotional issues. And I so agree with you about just that simplicity and that sense of wonder that comes across. And if you can do that with that simple, and you do, I mean, you've made a career out of it, if I may say so. And it's
I'll
wonderful.
let you do that. Yes, you can say that, please.
Okay. But it is true. All your work it's so emotional. It's just like, it just grabs you emotionally. Do you, to jump off from Rolie Polie Olie, what do you use to draw now? Do you use a computer or do you use hand? What do you do?
I use both. And today, today was one of the first times I've ever, as we were leaving this morning to come up to Arkansas, today, as I was packing, was the first time I almost didn't bring an actual sketchbook of paper, right? And because I paint on my iPad a lot.
Wow.
And, and I'll be honest with you, I prefer to paint and draw on paper or canvas, but there's something very freeing about the tablet and the pad. And, because if you mess up, you can fix it,
Yeah.
so fast. You can dive in and not have a clue as to where you might be going. And find your way in a way that, is kind of suicidal in canvas and paint. And, but it's an incredible tool, especially in working in film, because time is so much of the recipe that is making something in animation and in film is time. And so things that can make that go faster, make things cost less, and the less they cost, the less people get panicky and try to second guess. So a lot of my career has been about trying to find ways that are faster and cheaper and less expensive so that people will leave you alone.
That's a good trick. I'll have to try that one. I've tried everything else.
Once you taste freedom.
It's
hard to go back.
I've found it just with the pandemic and everything. Actually, the pandemic made it great for animation. We were the only things open, because everybody could work from home, which that was great. It is exciting the same way. There are so many really good artists coming up. It's amazing. There's so many kids graduating from animation programs all over, and the abundance of talent is really, that's encouraging.
I found that to be true, and as well, and it is very exciting. And then again, also there's a lot of stuff they don't know, and I love getting to tell them about these jewels of the past, right? But I can't believe. It kind of took me aback this morning. I was like, you mean you're actually thinking of not bringing something you can draw that's real, right? You're just going to bring your iPad, you're not going to bring a piece of paper. And so I got one of my sketchbooks.
Do you find yourself just, is it for relaxation? Is it for work? Or you get an idea and then are you just doodling? What do you do?
My favorite thing to do is to sit in a restaurant or a bar and just draw, with no real focus. And some of the most interesting stuff happens then. I don't ever sit down and go, I'm going to do a story about the rise of machines over man. I never sit down with like a goal. Just it's in these unguarded moments that something comes to me, and a lot of times it's a phrase or a sentence or a title. Literally, Mr. Spam Gets a New Hat came from a lunch I had with a friend of mine who was just starting to practice law. And I said, so how's being a lawyer? And he said, I'd rather be hit in the head with hammers all day than practice law. And I was like, that is a vivid image. And I sat down as we were sitting there at lunch and drew this man with a derby hat being hit in the head with a wheel of hammers.
Wow.
That was I'm like, it struck me. It was like, people suffer. It's sad if your life if your life's work is the thing you hate to do, and it happens too much. And because sometimes people don't know what to do, or they're told you can't do that. I mean, I was lucky enough as a kid growing up that my parents were like, "Do you want to be an artist? Okay. I mean, we think you'll starve, but okay, we'll take care of you as long as we can, you know." And my father was so happy when I married a lawyer. He didn't know what to do. He's like, "Oh, thank God." I'm like, "Dad, I've had like bestsellers. I mean, come on." He just never could quite, you know, come to grips that I had succeeded. And it was sweet and funny. It wasn't really, I mean, he let me go to film school and art school. But I thought about that. I'm like, it's just what a dreary thing to have a job that you rely upon for your life that you hate. And so that's kind of what spam began as, is like how hopefully to avoid getting hammers all day. I took it literally.
I love that. It's like, I love the fact that the factory is called Hammered Ahead because that's the company name. And the three guys, one of them vaguely looks like Stan Laurel.
Oh, he absolutely is Stan Laurel.
Okay.
Yes.
And the other two are.
That's a Fatty Arbuckle.
Oh, okay. Like twins. Fatty Arbuckle was mean.
We didn't have money to do another model, so.
That solves many problems. I know. Yes.
I tell you, man. I mean, that's the thing about style, making a stylized world, right? You can get away with a lot of stuff, you know. So yes, of course, in this factory that makes hammers that hit you in the head all day, they're two of one guy. I mean, no one's ever questioned it.
That's great. He's the guy. He's the guy.
He's the guy. But I don't know what mischievous streak made me take two of the sweetest, you know, beings or characters in the history of cinema, you know, Fatty Arbuckle and Stan Laurel, and make them villains. I don't know why, what pleasure I got from that, but you know, there I was.
That's what I was thinking. It was like, oh, that can't be Stan. He's too nice to do that.
It's totally Stan. And
your worlds are always so complete. And do you pick a certain style according to story, or it's always you, of course? But then, like you said, Rolie Polie Olie was all round, which was a great experiment. The Santa Claus books are so beautiful. I mean, all of your work, the palettes you use, there's kind of a nostalgic sense to it, and very soothing. It draws you in, kind of like the Technicolor you were talking about. It draws you in, and that's always just great. It's just you get drawn into your world so quickly, and I think that's the mark of somebody who knows what they're doing.
Well, I'll tell you, I got some advice early on from Maurice Sendak, who wrote Illustrated Where the Wild Things Are. And that is a book that sort of saved me as a child. And Maurice was like, this is a good story, so I'm going to tell it in full.
Okay.
I was 5 years old, and I didn't understand the line between fact and fiction. I didn't even know there was a line. I just thought that stories were true, right? So I thought that everything that, if someone read me a story, or I read a comic book, or if I saw a movie, that it was a thing that had happened, right? Because it had people in it. And even if it had like singing bunny rabbits and stuff, I'm like, well, yeah, I haven't met those rabbits yet. And so I'm watching King Kong. I'm 5 years old, and I see King Kong for the first time. And it just broke my heart, you know, because Kong, I look back at it now, I'm like, I identify with Kong as a kid because, you know, when you're a kid, nothing's the right size, and you don't know any of the rules, and you get in trouble for stuff you don't even mean to do wrong. And that was Kong, man. Everything was cool, you know, on Skull Island. He was venerated, right? But then they took him to New York, and he's the wrong size for that. And he doesn't know the rules. And so he just keeps getting in trouble. He keeps breaking stuff. And then when, you know, and he was in love with this impossible little woman, which my twin stepchildren, who are 10, and I've basically taken them to, you know, film schools since I met them. And they put it very succinctly. because I love monster movies and we've been watching all of them, right? And they said, Bill, there's something about monster movies. There's a thing that's in all of them. And it's that the monster is almost always a dude. And that this dude, monster, always wants the wrong girlfriend. I mean, King Kong didn't need that. He needed to find a nice big ape girlfriend. He didn't need that little bitty girl. That was not going to work. And the Creature of the Black Lagoon needed to find a nice fish girl and not the girl in the bathing suit. And they just went through each film. He's like, the mummy needed a mummy girl. And it's so brilliant.
That's great observation. It really is.
So there I was watching Kong and just feeling bad for him, right? And understanding, I guess, the need for someone that didn't want you. And which is also the theme in a way of The Great Gatsby. So it all comes around. But I was so upset and sad. And my parents were like, what's wrong with you? You're so weepy today at 5. And did you spill your ice cream? I mean, what happened? And I'm like, no, I watched that movie King Kong about the gorilla guy and they killed him. And I'm really sad. And he goes, well, it's okay. He's made up. And I go, huh? And they're like, it's made up. It's not real. It didn't really happen. I'm like, no, it's on TV. It's true. It's like the news, right? They're like, no, that's not how that works. And they sat down and they explained to me, fiction. And I'm like, oh, it's just, what? Wow. So if King Kong isn't real, then what about, the Wicked Witch of the West? No. Well, the Tooth Fairy, maybe? And they're like, no. What do you think? I'm like, I don't know. Do you want to know the truth? And I'm like, yeah, because I didn't think it was going to be what they told me. So when they said, no, it's all made up, I was crushed. I was like, so none of this cool stuff is true. And they're like, okay, so how does that happen? That these stories, you call them, are, and it's, well, there are people called writers. They make things up. And I go, they're maker-uppers? That's a thing you could do? And they're like, yes. Yeah, I'm like, well, that's what I want to be, is a maker-upper, because this, I couldn't articulate it, but what was happening was there was a big hole, right? It was like all the cool stuff was gone. But it sounded like that would be a cool job to make up stuff, and it would help me fill that hole. And so it almost within weeks of that incident, Where the Wild Things Are, came out for the, as a book. And a very astute librarian put that book in my hands. And I was like, it just galvanized me, swept me away. And I was like, gosh, it's the coolest drawings I've ever seen. I'd already started drawing as a kid. Every kid does when they're little. And I was like, I asked the librarian, I said, how does this happen? How did this happen, this book? And she goes, well, there's a person called a writer. I've not heard of those guys. And they put the name of the writer on the book. And this guy's name is Maurice Sendak. And I'm like, oh. And he drew the pictures too? Yes. I'm like, wow, I have to meet this guy. Where does he live? And she looks on the flap and she goes, he lives in New York City. And I go, that's where King Kong went. And she said, well, yeah, yes, he did actually. And he goes, I want to go there. And she's like, well, it's really far. And I go, well, how far? And she showed me on the globe. So it was like, it took her index finger and her thumb, like that. It's that far. And I go, that is not that far.
I can do that now.
So she goes, all right, look, we can write him a letter. And so I didn't know how to, I knew my alphabet, but I didn't know it very well. Okay. So she helps me write this letter to Maurice Sendak. And then I said, I really like your book, Where the Wild Things Are. I want to be a maker-upper when I grow up.
Oh, that's so great.
And he wrote me back. Being a maker-upper is a great thing to be.
Oh, wow.
You Bill, and when my book Dinosaur Bob came out in 1988, I dedicated it to King Kong. And because for me, it was like getting revenge. This family finds a dinosaur, a brontosaurus in Africa, and they bring it home. Like they found a dog. And, you know, because of his size, complications ensue. And it's tough to keep Bob, but he can play baseball really well, and he wins for the local team. And so they let him stick around. And he promises not to chase cars anymore, but he doesn't die, right? And the book came out it was with Harper and Row, which is also published Where the Wild Things Are. And it was the 25th anniversary of Where the Wild Things Are. And Maurice was around doing some stuff for it. And I told my publishers, you know, it's that same publisher, that I would like to meet Maurice. And so, well, he's kind of a curmudgeon. We'll see what we can do. And so I'm having one of my first book signings in New York, and at Books of Wonder, which is still there, and wonderful people run that place. And I think it's maybe the oldest children's bookstore there is. And anyway, they interrupted me and they said, "You have a phone call and you're going to want to take it." So I'm thinking somebody's dead, right? You know, back at home. And I picked up, "Hello," I'm all like nervous. And there's this gravelly voice on the other end. "Is this William Joyce?" "Yes." And I was just waiting for the bad news. And he goes, "Well, this is Maurice Sunak, and I understand you want to meet me." And I was like, yes. "Why? Why do you want to meet me?" And I said, "Well, because when," and then he finished the sentence for me. He said, "When you were a little boy?" And I go, "Yes. When I was a little boy, I read Where the Wild Things Are. I wrote you a letter, you wrote me back. And you encouraged me to be a maker-upper when I grew up." And he goes, "That sounds like something I wouldn't do. But anyway." "Why don't you," that's a very nice compliment, "meet me at the Empire State Building when when is your signing done?" I go, "An hour and a half." He goes, "All right, I'll meet you in front of the Empire State Building in an hour and a half. It's just a few blocks from the bookstore." And I didn't think to ask why we were meeting at the Empire State Building, but I was excited about it because I don't know, all these worlds seem to be merging, Kong and all things. And so I go over to the Empire State Building and I go to the right entrance, and there's this bearded little guy who looks like a wild thing. And I introduce myself and I go, "Maurice, why are we at the Empire State Building?" And he goes, "Well, I read your book, Dinosaur Bob, and I read an interview of you talking about King Kong and how much it meant to you. And that was a catalyst for your career." And he goes, "I saw it when I was 5 and when it first came out at the movie theater, and it changed my life. It made me a storyteller. And that's really what Wild Things is my version of King Kong. So I thought that we should come here where King Kong had his last greatest moments, and we should thank our father for giving birth to us." And, you know.
Wow, that's a story. That's amazing.
But what he told me was, he goes, "My stories are so simple, and my character design is so simple. It's all about simplicity. It's all about appeal without pander, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And don't get, just be true. And sometimes people will appreciate the truth that you present." And yeah, it was very good advice. And I've always tried to do that. I've always tried
So
to
great.
characters have a
And
gentle.
I also love the fact that the librarian did that. I mean, there are librarians who would have grabbed the book away from you.
Oh, and there were at that time. The book was
Yeah,
getting down all over the place for being too scary.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Or inappropriate. Yeah.
That's so much of life and careers, especially in art and cinema, is happy accidents that change our direction and help us find the way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good thing to remember.
It's,
I'm going to see if we have any questions, but I want to bring up two. Your works all do have a similar thematic thread. How would you describe it? I can't believe you've never been asked that before.
Well, it changes over time.
Oh, okay.
I mean, my first works were all about optimism, and in the face of a cynical world.
Mhm.
And that, you know, my feeling was that, especially in children's literature, that kids get preached to enough and they get told no enough. And so much of what made my life happy and my career work was people not saying no, that handful of people along the way that said, yes, you know, I like to draw. Yes, that's good. I like to make up stories. Yes, that's something you can do. And so my stories are about the people that say yes.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I think, and also the two films are similarly themed. I think just about, you know, sort of the power of art to help us, and kindness and love to transcend, which is
Really. I mean, and Maurice and I used to talk about this a lot. I'm like, Maurice, I think if I weren't an artist or a storyteller, I don't know how I deal with life, because it always rescues me. You know, these stories I tell are a way of dealing with whatever's going on, whether it's good or bad. And he said, oh my God, yeah. I mean, think of your poor friend who's getting a head and hammer all the time. I mean, imagine what if you didn't have this outlet. That we are so lucky, and they pay us.
That's very true. Sometimes I forget that, but you're right. We are lucky to do what we love.
Nobody
Yeah.
hates it. I mean, that would suck. And there's times when, and Maurice would even say, I have accomplished nothing. I'm like, just shut up, old man.
I met him. I got to meet him once. He had to approve me for, I was doing a job for his company. I was writing, adapting Barnaby, the Crockett Johnson comic strip.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was going to be a movie this was 30 years ago.
That was
He hated LA.
Was it Harold and the Purple Crayon?
No, they did that.
Right.
They were trying to do Barnaby and it never got made as a feature. I think I talked to, I think they're trying to do it as a TV show. I loved it. It was a great project. I love working on it. But he had to come in. I went to the company, his company's office in LA, and he hated LA because he was always afraid there was going to be an earthquake while he was there. So it was the fastest meeting ever. You know, just like he kind of ran in. He was using a cane by that time, and he was very curmudgeonly, I remember. But he kind of like approved me as a second thought, just because he wanted to get out of there. But it was a thrill. I mean, I was just thrilled to meet him. So
Sure.
yeah.
Wise man.
I'm gonna ask Bree or whoever's listening in if we have any questions. Chris, oh, you're back, Chris.
Hi, it's me. Yes, so I've been hovering in the background. Well, yes and no. Our gentle viewers have not yet asked a question, but here I am. I have questions. The stories you told, I echoed some of Brian's facial expressions and erections. So your tales with Maurice and your rage at discovering that King Kong of all things was not real, and that those two things propelled you in this magical direction. It's just so special and vibrant. So as an animator, maybe this is to both of you. So, how in the creative process, in movies and cartoons, you see animators and creators, then you see this big bubble with all this crazy world happening, in their heads. Do you see visually that way? Does it kind of play out in your brain as it going, or does it live organically as the page goes on? I'm always fascinated by that part of the creative process.
Kind of, for me, it's a tandem event. It's like the more I've done this, sometimes the word comes first now, but at the beginning it was the images came first, and I would try to find a story to fit those images. And I mean, it's kind of where King Kong came from. I mean, Dinosaur Bob came from was instead this image of a brontosaurus sailing down the Nile with a a big sail on it, like a Viking ship, and a family riding atop it, and they're going past, the Sphinx. It just, I don't know why. I had that image, and I'm like, God, that's really cool. I have to come up with some reason for this image. But usually now I'll sit there and it's the words that come first and the language. But as I'm writing it, I see it so vividly in my head, and it's kind of exhausting. It's wonderful. I'm transported, and I get so many endorphins from this. But it's like if I do it for more than 4 hours, man, I'm just like dead meat. And like I doing a 3 or 4 hour Zoom, many of them this past year doing Mr. Spam, I was like, this is so much easier to Zoom for 3 hours than it is to write for 3 hours. And because I've read somewhere they use a lot of calories or something when you're writing, and if that's true, I should be emaciated. But I do see it so clearly, and I see it in cinematic terms. I even dream in very like cinematically, and vividly. So I'm lucky in having, I don't know, some powers or some ganglions in my brain that lead me to seeing these things in my head is so abundantly detailed and clearly that then it's just a question of telling someone, what I'd like to see. And sometimes it can get in the way.
Ross, come here, please.
It's like you can't get too married to the thing in your head, and because sometimes there's a better version. And when you're working with a group of people, collaborators, which is what filmmaking is, you have to be open to that somebody's going to have an idea that will make what was in your head even better, and you need to be able to adjust the dial and not fight it, and not like you have to check your ego at the door. Sometimes there's things are absolutely truth, and you need to stand for that. But you also have to be adaptable. That the same way that anything like that is. And I find that to be the most enjoyable part of my career as I get older, is relying on others to help you find the way. That you don't have to do all the work. You shouldn't. Nobody's going to have any fun working on that. You have to have room for everybody's vision. And that oftentimes, whatever vision you've had, your job is to share that vision in a way that they understand it and can contribute to it. But there's always very unexpected things that happen in that kind of collaboration. And that happened more on Mr. Spam than I think anything I've done. And where, like, the editor came up with brilliant stuff that made the short really come together in a way that I had not ever considered, and took a minute, like, it's just like, dang, that is radical, but it solves this problem, and it's good. So yes, let's do that. And that's cool. That's as cool as you think of it yourself. Maybe cooler.
I went from writing features to animation and television, kind of all animation, then TV animation. And it was kind of shocking, because when you're just writing, you're in a room by yourself, as you know, and then to be thrown in. And I kind of learned, like you, I kind of learned just by diving in and learning from everything going on around me. And it was great. I got to, collaborating, I found I really enjoyed. And it's the same way. It's like, get the best people around you and let them do what you hired them to do, and best idea wins. There's no, we're making something we all want to make, and let's do the best version.
It's really fun, when that room begins to cook.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get so excited, I just can't stand it. You know?
You have to leave the room.
Yeah, I'm not kidding. I mean, literally, it's like, guys, I have to just chill for a second. This is so cool.
That's great. That's wonderful. Any
One
questions?
word that I, one
Okay.
word that I kept hearing you say from time to time during things that you were discussing was the language and language of film. I feel that as I think Brian and I do, that each film is a living, breathing entity unto its own. And, you know, the language of film is like the old Landmark moniker, the language of film is universal. But, you know, when the moving image and the marriage of the music and everything to it just is sort of a magical thing that's out in the air. And I loved all your references and influences from silent films. Because, you know, if you can't tell a story without words, you know, making people kind of find it in their head is a great thing. During my early film classes, we even studied things like Eisenstein and, you know, and Murnau and the great comedy of Laurel and Hardy. It just, you know, just things that happen. But the light and shadow of Murnau and things like that just kind of make it, you know, kind of a magical journey. So I like hearing that you kind of see it all happening around you in the great, you know, way artists do. And I keep looking at the cherub over your right shoulder, hoping that would come to life. And it looks like it's ready to do a little something. And I hope that it doesn't do it on your shoulder. But in my mind, I kept playing that out like it was an animated thing going to happen. So I didn't get my full wish.
This hotel is very interesting, and it's an art hotel, right? I'm in Bentonville, Arkansas.
Oh, I was at. Have you gone to the art museum there? It's a wonderful experience.
I mean, literally, we pulled up and I ran into this room to do this. Okay, so I've seen.
Go try and spend a few hours at the art museum. It's beautiful. It's beautiful experience and walk around the grounds. Yeah, please do. It's great.
That's why we came. You know,
Yeah.
Before we wrap it up, I would love to just ask quickly about Gatsby.
Okay.
Are you having a good time?
Really good, yes.
I think it's a great idea. Have you heard, like, are people like, are you crazy, or are they kind of accepting of it?
You know, okay, this is what I'm having a ball, and I mean, we haven't gotten greenlit yet, but
Yeah.
it was a beautiful script written by Brian Selznick, who did, you know, the Mystery of Hugo Cabaret that became the film. Martin Scorsese did. Brian and I have known each other for a long time. We had the same editor, HarperCollins, and I've wanted to work with Brian for such a long time. And he started working on screenplay adaptations of his novels, and I was like, I think that he would be great for this. And so I asked him, and he's like, you know, I've only read The Great Gatsby once, but I liked it. So tell me why you want to make it. And I got into it, and he was like, okay, now I see. like, yes, I would like to do that. And so we've been working for the last, I don't know, 6 months, maybe a year, I'm not sure. But we've got it, you know, to a place that I think is just spectacular. And it got under the skin of the book and the skin of Fitzgerald in a way that I didn't. I mean, I was dissatisfied with all the film versions of it, and because it's a book I love, you know, above all other novels, and it's as important to me as Wild Things and Kong. And it's a book I read as a teenager, and I was this raggedy ass hippie kid, right? And very unsure about what adulthood, you know, offered. It seemed like nothing but constraint and misery. But there was Gatsby, right, with his unshakable dream of this beautiful girl, and the idea that he could reclaim the past, and the life that he led, and the way that he lived his life, even though he may have been a gangster, you know, there was something about that when it says in the book, he had a romantic readiness of which, the likes of which I have never seen and will never see again. Right? And that phrase and so much of the book galvanized me as this raggedy ass hippie kid. Like, there is, even if you die for love miserably, there is something to adulthood that's worth all the trouble. And so I've loved the book ever since, and I've read it. I would read it every year just because I'd find something interesting and different in it every time. But now, sitting down and taking on the mantle of like adapting it and thinking I'm worthy of doing it, and having read the book probably 100 times in the last year, and figuring out what I think has been missing from the film adaptations of it, taking everything I've learned and love about the movies and love about Gatsby, and trying to merge those two worlds of cinema and the written page. And that's where I think the film adaptations have fallen short, is they never quite captured the alchemy of Fitzgerald's achievement in language and in plotting, because it's a peculiar book the way it's laid out, and it's not studying Fitzgerald and learning about him. He wanted to make movies. I think he was a director in his mind. He writes, when he wrote his scripts, only one of which ever he got a credit for, a produced screenplay, though, but he wrote many of these scripts. But he wrote as a director. He left no room for the actual director to do anything. And so they would go, well, thank you very much. And then they wouldn't use his stuff. And because he got it, but he saw clearly, and I think that's what was going on. Gatsby, he was seeing in cinematic terms. And so the storytelling, you have to like pay attention, close attention to the way he phrases things and the dreamscape the stylized dreamscape that he makes. And you have to use that when you're adapting the film. And you don't have to stay absolutely true to what happens in the book. You have to make it into cinema. And we maybe added 2 or 3 things that aren't mentioned in the book, because he leaves so many clues in that book about how to emphasize something. And it may only be, there's 6 paragraphs at the beginning of chapter 8 that no one's ever touched in any of the films. And people don't even think about much when they talk about Gatsby, but they're the most beautiful paragraphs in the book. And they're talking about when he met Daisy and in Louisville before he went overseas to the war. And they're falling in love, and his going abroad, and she trying very hard to stay true to him and wait for him. And the pressures that weighed on her from family and society and everything to find a husband, and not one that was poor, and not one that was poor and overseas in war would probably get killed. And it's only 6 paragraphs, but man, it's so much in those 6 paragraphs. And I'm like, that is something we need to pay attention to. And so I found the book much different than I ever realized. And it's a much deeper book than I ever realized. And it's much more subtle, intricate, and even more masterful. And I'm not even sure that Fitzgerald was fully aware, and most artists aren't, when they're doing something extraordinary. They're just writing, this state of grace. And because he wrote it quickly. And I have the facsimile edition they put out of his actual handwritten draft, right? And he didn't change very much. So you're sitting there reading these phrases that you know by heart that are so famous. And it's like, they're just there. He just wrote them in script. And so occasionally there's one scratch out and he substitutes a word. But I think he was existing in a state of absolute creative grace. And he knew it was his best work, but it was completely unappreciated at the time. It got bad reviews. It didn't sell. It's only in the decades since that it's become revered. And it has been such a pleasure to dig into that and then start to design what I think that world would look like. And that has been, we've chosen two artists from that period to emulate in our character design and designing the world. And that's Maxwell Parrish and J.C. Lydecker. And I'm like, that's Gatsby's world. The people look like Lydecker, arrow collar people. Those amazing illustrations he did with the Saturday Evening Post and Collier's, and then for arrow collar. I mean, I think animation is uniquely situated to adapt the dreamscape that Gatsby casts, more so than live action ever could, because we can start out from that stylized point from the beginning. And so everything from then on, it gives you a license to take it to that heightened romantic readiness that Fitzgerald talks so much about. And it will have a reality to it, we hope, that amplifies that rather than fights against it. And I think that's what live action does with Fitzgerald. It fights against what he's most masterful at, and that is creating dreams. Movies are dreams. They are, waking dreams. And so using him, using his prose, using his skills as much as we can with what we know about the movies and what we know about animation. Some people have gone, what are you going to have, like a singing Rolls Royce? I mean, are the teacups going to serenade Daisy? I'm like, no. But I tell you what, if we get to do it the way we want to, it's going to break your heart the way the book's supposed to.
Yeah.
And we can cast it however we please,
It kind of, it's the old, I know we got to run, Chris, but it's that, the age-old thing about whether animation is a genre or a medium. It's a medium, and I don't think people think of it, but it's like pictures like yours that will, expand that thinking.
Well, there's a famous quote by this critic, Kenneth Tynan, amazing British critic, smoked and drank himself to death at an early age. Man, he was fun to read. I bet he was fun to hang out with. And he said, when animation gets out of the business of singing bunny rabbits, it's gonna really show us what movies can do. So I've always liked that quote.
Yeah,
I want to see what we can do.
that's great, and a wonderful note to end our discussion on.
Well, thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce, for sharing the crazy alchemy of the Wild Things and Fitzgerald and King Kong that all mushed together in that beautiful mind of yours to make the art that you do, words and pictures, both. You too, Brian Holfield. Thank you both for spending part of your Saturday afternoon with us during the 30th annual Whitaker St. Louis International Film Festival. It's been a very special afternoon.
Let me tell you, it was a good reason to wake up at 5 this morning.
Oh, that's a nice compliment. Thank you.
Good enough. Okay, and thank you to our viewers for watching, and please enjoy the rest of the festival.